Okay,
Thanks,
folks,
Nick.
Jerry, and I want to thank you again for jumping on the call for us today, and we'll get right to it. So let's just jump right into it, Andy. Business continuity, fill in the blank, right? So over the years, the terminology has changed, the requirements have changed, and for us, we've seen this as business continuity planning, testing, management, business continuity programs. So there's a lot of different names and acronyms. We'll cover a few of those, but the key here is to understand more about what the content is rather than some of the flashy names or acronyms. A lot of folks get bogged down in that, and hopefully Andy and I today will help clear up some of that and point out the important aspects of the facets and elements and requirements for business continuity management. Okay, so if you look at business continuity planning, it is you're looking at system dependencies. You're looking at different. Here's some of the acronyms I sort of warned you about, right? Some use maximum tolerable periods of disruption, mean time to repair, RTO, recovery time objective. That's a common one we have. For me, it's this. Look, we need to put a document together, sort of a framework for timely resumption of interruptions to service, right? Critical functions for any business need to be running to allow that business to move forward. And when there's an interruption, we need to get on it right away. That's really what we're looking for here. So we're going to try to help you walk through some of what needs to be in a plan and then needs to be managed overall when you talk about the discipline of business continuity management, what that involves. So just to kind of address the plan versus management, plan is the document. Think of it that way, right? So we put together a document that has a lot of important information, recovery teams, important contact information, where to report to if facilities are inaccessible, what to do during a pandemic. I know that's right in the front of everybody's mind today, that dealing with that kind of situation. Those are the critical facets of what should be in a plan, vendor information, all those kind of critical items. And business continuity management, sure, it includes the plan, but it goes way beyond that, right? It's not just having that plan, but identifying ongoing risks and vulnerabilities that threaten the resiliency of a business, right? So going through that, but also a big emphasis is on risk management overall. So organizations in all verticals should have a risk management program that under that umbrella includes identifying risks in the management of business continuity.
Yeah, and I think that looking at business continuity from the perspective of being a single part in more of a larger framework when it does come to that risk management is a good way of looking at it, although it does include part of the risk management program an organization may have. It really is just a smaller part of the entire program overall.
So one of the things we'll touch on just briefly here, and we have the reference sheet at the end of the presentation where a lot of the content came from, but a fair amount came from the FFIEC. Why you ask, and the reason is because in the banking industry in the United States, it is very, very regulated, very stringent, and has specific requirements. Most recently, in late 2019, they updated their business continuity plan booklet and replaced it with the more broader, more comprehensive business continuity management. And that's where a lot of our focus will be today, is kind of that, not just from the banking perspective, but what does it mean to say business continuity management in any vertical, right? It's more of a process-oriented approach. It's technology, it's business operations, it's testing, it's communication strategies. All those things need to be a facet of your plan and your risk management lifecycle.
Yeah, and in kind of expanding upon that, the things you see here on the screen, technology, business operations, testing, this has a lot of overlaps in other portions of your risk management program overall. And as it relates to business continuity management, they do all really tie in together.
So continuing on the business continuity management sort of topic, right? Looking for management to oversee and implement these resiliency, the continuity of systems and critical functions, and then response capabilities. I would also add communications as a big piece of this thing too. So it's an umbrella that encompasses a lot of facets. So where, when you look at the management, where are disruptions to businesses occurring, right? And you look at these examples here, right? Cyber events, natural disasters, man-made events, pandemics. I mean, these are things that are real time and for the world today, sadly, front of mind and too real for us. But these are the kinds of things that are all businesses are up against at different times and varying degrees. So our program should align with strategic goals and objectives of an organization, right? So we don't build plans or programs in a vacuum. We align these as an organization with the goals and objectives of the business. And typical businesses perform annual strategic planning and setting goals for growth in the business, for addressing threats to the business, and a business continuity management program should dovetail right into that. Not be sort of fixed or built upon after, but rather baked in with it as you go forward. So clear goals and objectives should include the roles within an impact on overall financial services sector or other, other verticals. But one of the ones I always like to go to the banking world in on is this term or this thought of too big to fail. And this is quite specific, but it's like, it's in theory, it's asserts that certain operations or corporations, typically in the financial world, if you think about it, are often too big and interconnected to fail. If you think about some of our larger banks that are the backbone and fabric of business in the United States and in the world on the big world stage, some of these are so big and so interconnected that we can't afford them to fail. And that's, as we all know, years ago with the banking crisis, the bailout was geared toward not allowing that to happen.
Yeah, and it's important not to disregard the logistics that goes into something like this as well. Those strategic goals and objectives tend to change year over year. As technology changes, things in the world change, global events, as those goals and objectives change, so should the business continuity management program of the organization. And kind of going along with those too big to let fail idea for these organizations, there's a lot of logistics that goes into this beyond just creating a management program and leaving it at that. There's coordination internally, there's coordination externally. We're going to kind of talk about that a little bit more as we go.
So this is an interesting slide. I won't go into the detail one by one, but if you look at and consider sort of business continuity management as a life cycle or a cycle, with business continuity management being in the center, there are, critical facets or features of it. If you look at the top right, we're number one, overseeing and implementing resilience and continuity and response capabilities and making sure that we align those, as we mentioned on previous slides, to strategic goals of the organization and moving to perform a business impact analysis. And as I go around the circle, it's kind of like, it makes logical sense if you think of it. But one of the things that Andy mentioned on the last slide, I think is worth restating. I mean, this is really, think about this as, it's ever changing. It's a living document. Even this business continuity management, program itself is changing. Your business doesn't stay stagnant, nor do the threats to your business, right? So as new delivery channels become available, this life cycle needs to be considered as we build out and go through the business impact analysis and the risk assessing of these and building effective strategies and establishing plans that include incident response, because of the nature of the world today with we see ever increasing threats via ransomware and other phishing attacks that just are attacking all businesses ongoing. So when you look at this life cycle, consider all these pieces and look at it and apply it to your business, right? When we go in as Compass into organizations to help them build, whether it's an incident response plan or business continuity plan or management program for them, we're not putting our touch on it only. We're building it into their business and looking at what their strategic goals are, what their business impact analysis says to us, what critical functions are important to them and when they need them back online, things like that. So when you're doing it, if you're doing it yourself or involving an organization, do the same thing. Don't just plug in a template, but build it to be part of your business.
Yeah, once again, expanding on that too, think about the scalability. of these operations. Small organizations are going to have totally different business continuity management requirements than a larger organization. Some of the steps you see here on the screen may be more relevant or may not exist at all as part of their program. So it's not just incorporating it from the ground up as you go through your risk management strategy every single year. It's also ensuring that you're meeting the critical points for the program overall during the process that it's being developed, based on the resources at your disposal or at the organization's disposal, and like I said earlier, global events, anything that might have an effect on it, putting the correct and appropriate amount of emphasis on those functions.
So these next two slides are pretty good because they kind of help you walk through, where to start, what to do, and what's needed. Andy and I have been throwing around the terminology program or the term program, and really what a program is. I want to kind of break that down a little bit before I start on this slide. Is really, if you look at or consider, for example, your information technology security program. Well, the security plan itself is your set of policies, right? So I may have documents or policies that govern my business, and when you say security program, though, from that we want you to add to that in the thought of having the policies, but the implementation of those, the procedures that roll up to those, the ongoing monitoring of those, the education to the staff on those policies that apply to their business, their side of the business rather, because not all policies apply to all employees. So it's like all of these things and the ongoing training and monitoring and the risk assessing, and then doing it all over again as different, or updating it rather, as different changes come to your environment or to your business. So starting on these slides, you're looking at the, step one is overseeing and implementing the resilience, continuity, and response capabilities. These are the key facets to the communications, to the needs of the business as it relates to availability of your systems. And one note that's often left out when you talk about resilience and business continuity is the consideration that a lot of businesses today outsource. And you may have recovery time objectives that are like really tight, like, oh, I want this system. We need to be resilient to the fact that when stuff happens, we can recover and be online within 24 hours. Well, that's great, but we're also under contract with a vendor that says 72 hours availability. Well, that doesn't mesh very well. If they're saying 3-day availability and you're saying I want it in 1 day, they're not going to have to put it back online. They may or may not, but they have 3 days to get it online and you want it in 1. So you need to make sure that you're including not just the stuff that you're hosting locally perhaps, but also those contractual relationships. Look at those service level agreements. And number two, we said it a few times, but aligning it with goals, right? Don't build your plan or update your plan and program in a vacuum. When you do this, look at management's objectives, the annual objectives that are being reviewed annually and implemented through across the board through strategic planning, and developing business impact analysis to identify these critical functions. A lot of folks come in and go, look, I am up against it. I got written up by my auditors. So when Compass comes in to build a plan for a client, some of them are like, well, I got this tight time frame. Yeah, can we just jump right to the plan? And it's like, no, you can't. It's not my plan. It's your plan. And I don't know your critical functions. We need to discover those, identify those together, prioritize those. Tell me when you need them back. It's not when I think you need them. Two businesses can be identical and have different recovery time objectives, have different weights on the impact to their business based on the way they run their business. So it's important for you to know it's your plan, it's your business, and we need to understand information about it. And then we can help build a plan with you to make sure that it meets your needs. So going through and assessing, right? Looking at the things that make these critical functions tick, risk assessing those, putting mitigation strategies together, workarounds, if you will, ways to minimize impact should there be disruption. And then step 5 is sort of developing strategies, which is part of that. Sort of when you do the assessment, the output of that is the mitigation strategies to work around or work through these interruptions to service until such time that primary functions have been restored.
And before we continue, and to sort of follow up on that as well, as far as those business impact analysis and being able to come up with the appropriate recovery objectives, whether it's recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives, those all need to be done, as Jerry said, not inside a vacuum. This is so that the results of the final planning process and the implementation of the management cycle are realistic. It's great. A lot of organizations have these modes that they want to get to a certain point by a certain time with a certain amount of productivity. But the truth is, it actually does harm to the organization if they're not being realistic about what their recovery objectives are. So those do need to align internally. Sorry, Jerry, I'll let you take that back.
No, good points. So step 6, I built this out a little bit more too, because there's a lot, we're seeing, if you think about, when you're establishing the continuity plan for your organization as part of your risk management strategy, you're building out this business continuity management program, if you will, and part of it's that plan. But it includes also, like we mentioned earlier, incident response and disaster recovery things, crisis management, emergency. So I said earlier on, and I'm going to reiterate, don't get hung up so much on these terms, because I'll tell you one thing, not only there's a boatload of acronyms, but they are used and misused so much. So when you look at incident response, that's a straightforward one. That's a requirement in most industries, that you have an incident response plan that, and think of that as more like threats that are intentional threats to a business, where if done properly, if you move through an incident response plan, you will move to isolate these critical functions that may have been impacted by a threat or an attack, an incident, if you will. And by isolating, make those systems or functions unavailable. Now, business continuity management and the plan take over from that side. So what the business side of the house will be doing, while the technology side, and the incident response team is moving to restore those systems and isolate, minimize the spread of whatever attack is occurring, in the plan. So it's reasonable to have both of these initiatives occurring at once: business continuity and incident response. DR, think of DR often as disaster recovery is really the IT facet. So that's a subset of any business continuity plan, and crisis management is really the communications aspect and sort of the trigger of when things go, but it's that emergency response type thing. But again, your plans are built properly. You're going to have that clear communication, that very clear lineage and direction and escalation as incidents, or in the case of business continuity, as they're risen up to, the threats, or in the case of interruptions, are significant enough. I'm searching for words here. Significant enough to impact many business units, that the communication takes place to those business units that are impacted, and that management overall gets updated accordingly. So one of the big things on this step 6 I broke out was, if you guys think about a plan for organizations, I have small organizations and big organizations. I think it's important. Just a takeaway would be that if the plan is so big and it's thousands and thousands of pages of detail for these business units recovery, it becomes valueless. So for large organizations, consider using playbooks. It's a very, very important tool to utilize. And the plan, a business continuity plan itself, should be kind of considered to be sort of a framework or a guide for that, for the business, right? The quick orchestration of the communications, and then where specific business units are impacted, that they would invoke their specific playbooks, their detailed procedures, their normal operating procedures, but it would also be those additional workarounds when systems or functions are not available. So a big business continuity plan, and then as each business unit is put into a situation where their business function, the critical functions, been disrupted, they would pull in their playbooks and carry out their local activities, and it makes it just work perfectly with the communications, and they are maintaining their playbooks. And by the way, they should be testing those all year round, not just during an annual integrated full business continuity test, but ongoing as the year goes forward. So then when there is a test, we know these playbooks can be relied upon. Small organizations, you don't need the playbook approach. You're so small, there's only a few employees or business units, and you can have it all built into a plan that might be 100 pages or so. But for those large organizations, that's not an option. Step 7, implementing the continuity training program. Well, you can have a plan, but if people don't know what the heck to do, it's valueless, like with anything else. So move to implement a training program to the stakeholders, to the team members on the plan. Make sure folks know what their role would be, so that when we test, or then or when we may have a real interruption to service, folks know what to do. It's just common sense. The exercises and tests, I talked about that, and really moving to establish reasonable tests on an ongoing basis for these playbooks by business unit, but also an integrated one annually where it's more comprehensive. And if you've never done one, start with a simple one. We call it a tabletop test. It's where you gather a few folks together, you have a scenario, walk through the scenario together, carry out the lessons learned, what should we have done better, things like that. Kind of straightforward. We do a lot of these with the organizations, and it really does help them in the event of a real disaster, being prepared for it. Reviewing and updating the plan. Yeah, you guys, look, we talked about it a lot. Your environment's changing, so are the threats. So make sure that in step 10 that you're monitoring ongoing and reporting, business continuity and resilience activities as needed. So a lot on that slide, I know, but real important, especially step 6.
Yeah, and rounding back real quick to step 10 there too, monitor and report business continuity and resilience activities. A good way to look at this is all the steps on this page really are your resiliency activities for your business continuity management cycle. Making sure that you have IR plans in place and DR plans, which DR and BCP get confused a lot, even though DR is a subset of BCP as stated here. They do get confused. One is more specific to technology and bringing technology back online versus BCP, which is the continuation of business overall. Really, the training that you're giving your employees, making sure that you are reviewing these plans and that they're accurate based on the current environment and current threats that are out there. Those are your resiliency activities. There are other things, but step 6 through 10 it's a good way to look at it. Your resilience is by putting these steps into motion.
Business continuity management governance. So overall, what we're sort of suggesting here is that business continuity management practices and things, they should be part of your business continuity management sort of governance, which is just nothing more than a fancy word for sort of the oversight, if you will, of the whole program. So identifying continuity levels that are needed, consistent with the operations and the criticality. It's a reiteration of sort of the things we mentioned before, ensuring that we have the policies. And a policy for business continuity is really going to include, or business continuity management is really going to just include the directives from either the board level or executive management level that says, we'll have a plan, we'll update the plan regularly, we'll test it, we'll ensure we train folks on it, we'll ensure that, based on the plans that we keep it relevant. Nothing worse than spending time and money and building out a plan and then letting it get stagnant. Making sure that you allocate the right resources to ensure that the business continuity management activities are being carried out, right? That updating and the testing and the ongoing facets of it, just, make sure we've got the real resources that can do this stuff. So making sure that management, implements this program so folks understand their role and it's ongoing and we're monitoring it to make sure it happens.
So on that note, Jerry, thanks. As far as when you're pushing forward governance on this, it's also important to make sure that you're not just trying to check a box when you're putting these practices into place. Yes, it is important to be compliant to make sure that you are meeting compliance requirements, but at the same time, you also should be ensuring that the programs and the activities that you're putting into place are benefiting the overall strategy and the continuity of business. So you want to check 2 boxes. One of those boxes is to check boxes, and the other one is to actually ensure security and continuity overall.
Okay, so business continuity management policies or policies, whatever. It's the goal again there is just kind of like with any of your policies, if you look at the anatomy of a policy, you're going to have that sort of that purpose and goal or objective, and then the scope of it. How far is it just this one business unit, or is it enterprise wide? And then clearly delineating or identifying the roles and responsibilities. This is critical because it's one thing to go in any policy, and business continuity management is no different, and read some great things. Wow, this is going to meet every checkbox that's required for compliance in this industry. But at the end of the day, if I can't, as an auditor, tell who's doing what, who's responsible, in other words, who's accountable, it's valueless. Why? Because if it's not getting done, who are you going to blame? Who's going to fix it? Who's going to, so make sure you have clear ownership and accountability for this, and make sure that the authority, the sign off on this by this project sponsors or overall management, that they're supporting this business continuity management policy, and that they have blessed the policy. And like with all policies in most organizations, in most industries, it's required to be done annually. Okay.
And something we find is that people don't know what they don't know. So if there are responsibilities that are required by individuals or other entities, third parties, partners, doesn't matter. If there are responsibilities out there that have tasks assigned to them, if people don't know, or if organizations don't know where their role fits in there, how is it going to get done? They don't know what they don't know, and that brings it back down to the accountability, and also ensuring that if there are programs put into place, if there are policies put into place, that not only are they being created and people are being notified of their responsibilities, but they've actually acknowledged those responsibilities and the policy itself.
So you look at oversight, we kind of alluded to this earlier, whether it's a board structured environment at your business, or senior leaders, executive management, there's somebody or there's a body at your organization that has oversight to the critical decision making in the organization. These are the folks that typically are going to support these kinds of programs and need to support and endorse these kinds of programs, ensuring that that folks are assigned ownership to make sure the business continuity management program has the right folks responsible and accountable for making sure it happens, making sure that we allocate the resources to make the whole thing work, right? Because we can have a great plan and a great program, but at the end of the day, if we don't have the resources assigned to make it occur, it's going to fall quite short. It needs to align also with the business strategies, as we talked about, and the organization's risk appetite. So understand that the business continuity risks and adopting policies and plans to manage these events is really, really important. So fold that in, making sure that you guys have done that risk assessing and have adopted the right policies and plans to make sure that we can manage events as they occur and unfold. Make sure the plans are updated regularly, and that as changes occur, they continue to be updated as well. So one of the big challenges in organizations is who's going to be the plan owner. In this case, the oversight of the we know the oversight is going to be, like we said, board or executive, but who owns making sure that the plan gets updated regularly and that kind of thing. And that's important. It's not in a lot of places they go, oh, it's IT, right? Because a lot of these functions is IT, there's some technology behind it, they own it. And that is short-sighted, because the biggest part of this is the business, not IT and the technical pieces. While very important and pervasive to the organization, it is business first. So business is what drives everything. Technology makes it occur and gives it the wherewithal or ability to make it occur, but business needs to drive it. So make sure you have business leaders need to own their pieces, not technology first.
Yeah, and I think that a good way of stating that too is it shouldn't just be oversight. It is important for there to be conditions in place for there to be oversight over the program, but also that it is effective oversight. Not to understate it, but effective oversight requires cooperation, coordination, and communication between business units, stakeholders, the senior level executives and managers. Having the oversight in place is great when it's on paper, but it's important to actually make it effective by putting that communication in place.
And just kind of continuing on the oversight aspects of it, just making sure that we've defined those clear roles and responsibilities. And succession planning, it doesn't just end with critical functions in the organization. I hope that all of you on this call and your businesses that you work with and for have good succession plans for critical functions in the business. That needs to parlay into these policies and procedures, and in this case, the business continuity one. So make sure that you fold that thought process into it. Also, making sure that you've got the right knowledgeable folks involved, and also validating that personnel understand the business continuity roles, right? They can't just, so by validating, I mean, making sure that you train these folks, they understand their roles. We mentioned that before, but it's key. So make sure that's done and reevaluated more than annually, at least annually, but I'd say more, but just make sure that folks understand what their role is. And the way to do all of this on this slide, or a good part of this, is through your testing annually. You're going to see that you've got the right folks, and you can measure their performance on the testing to ensure they do get their role and they've carried it out as required or requested.
With the reevaluation of these processes year over year, where we know that by reviewing the plans, by reviewing the programs overall, things may change, but so do the roles and responsibilities of the individuals that may partake in that plan or may have a responsibility in that plan. Those things will also adapt as the plan changes. So it's important to understand that just because someone may have had a specific role in the plan last year or previous year, it may not be so, especially as new things happen, like the pandemic, which we haven't been in a situation like this since 1918. So this is this is something new as far as business continuity. So looking at it from that perspective, there may be additional duties and responsibilities that year over year may have not changed.
Yeah, good points. Good points, Andy. We've been brought in with to organizations that even have solid plans, but I found that many do not have a pandemic plan, planning facets to it. I know in the banking industry it is required and has been, boy, since the avian bird flu way back when, H1N1, and a lot of different ones. Way back when it's been required. So anybody on the call that's from the financial industry, it's old school. A lot of other verticals though did not require some detail built in for pandemic planning. So now I hope that the world understands we need to take this a little bit more seriously and do some preparedness for that, and ensure that we have PPE stored off, in locations, facilities, as well as, the education associated with what a pandemic brings to the table. There's definitely specific nuances that a pandemic presents. So make sure you build that kind of stuff in. So sort of back a little bit to the oversight, right? So confirming that the tests occur annually and the training does. And so a lot of places, what happens is that when you go through and you do your testing, and after you built your plan and you've done your training and then testing, that you report this to your board or to executive management at least annually, so that they can make sure that with their oversight role, that they can make sure that any weaknesses or issues with the testing that took place or the training, they can move to track and ensure that these are resolved, that folks are regularly testing, and that moving forward to updating plans as needed. Because remember, when you're doing a test of these, and whether it's an incident response plan test, or in this case, business continuity, when you're measuring what plan says you would do relative to during your test, what people would actually do. So when we do these exercises with organizations, we build scenarios, we walk them through it, and what would you do next? Then what? Then where would you do? What about this? And we walk them through it, and when you're done, you carry out a lessons learned. You'll see very often there's a delta, right? The difference between what they said they would do and what their plan says they would do. And so it might result in updating the plan. Many times, what you did during a test might be better, so update your plan. Likewise, sometimes what the plan said to do was there for a reason. Follow it, right? You didn't follow it, so it took longer to resolve, and therefore there was more of an impact on your clients. And so with the oversight, making sure that you report these things to the oversight board or executive committee or group that's overseeing this plan and the testing strategies and things, just make sure that's continuous and that responses are coordinated, and involve external groups as well, meaning, if I have critical vendors and things, it's not just local to my business in a vacuum. Most businesses involve or utilize third-party providers. So you want to expand your testing to include them and make sure that they're part of it.
And yeah, if I could follow up, Jerry, this comes from the medical professional in me, but a good way to look at tests is, and I love analogies, that's why I keep using them. A good way to look at tests of plans is like a vaccine. We've heard good news about the vaccine for coronavirus. Multiple organizations are putting one out, and it's already starting to ship, and some people have already had one. Tests are like the vaccine. You get a little bit of it, you get a little bit of it to recover from it in the long run. So really, you're applying what you know by going through it and finding the gaps, and then adjusting moving forward, so that the next time it happens for real, it has less of effect on the organization overall.
And then audit side, and I say this only because I don't have a knowledge of who's on the calls per se, but I know a lot of folks through ISACA are CISO certified, like our folks are. And if you're performing audits for organizations, or if you're an internal auditor at your organization, you want to make sure that whoever built the plan and goes through and performs regular business impact analysis and risk assessing, right? To ensure that we understand what's critical, because that might have changed. It's updated to marry with what the business is doing now and their strategic planning. So make sure that those are updated regularly and that they're reasonable. That is to say that the risk assessing really does look at the functions, the critical functions, in the prioritized order that the business has identified. So make sure that we also go to and evaluate some of the controls for reliability, accuracy, and effectiveness. So when you look at some of these strategies, mitigation strategies for risks that are critical to these functions, if you have a risk associated with a critical function, what's the plan to mitigate that risk, and is it reasonable, and going through ensuring that. And then also when it comes to involving third parties, like I mentioned on the last slide, SOC reports, those are just, CPA firms perform these, but these are, these SOC 2 Type 2 reports for third-party service organizations are phenomenal. These are kind of the de facto standard in the U.S. for a lot of organizations, where an independent party comes in and assesses you on your functions, whatever ones you actually select those, but it's good measure. So if I'm using a vendor, third-party provider that's critical, I want to make sure they have a SOC report or other independent audit, among other things. But I want to see what their contract says about, in their service level agreement, what they say about availability, what do they say about security and privacy. And these SOC reports also will give you some insight to some of the testing of the controls and things before you move forward and sign off on a contract that might not serve yourself or your clients the way you hope they would. Okay, so looking forward on some of the other things to consider, right? Compare your inherent risk with. By the way, there's inherent risk and residual risk. And inherent risk is a risk of a function or critical control that's there. It's inherent to the nature of what you're doing. Residual risk is what's left after you apply control. So if I have an inherent risk associated with using the internet, well, there's a whole heck of a lot if I'm traversing the internet with confidential information. But if I put VPN tunnel in and use multi-factor authentication and I'm encrypting data that passes, now I've applied controls around the risk, the inherent risk of using the internet for commerce. And then what's left is the residual risk. And there it's quite reasonable. The levels of risk are reasonable. So that's how you kind of go through. And organizations, risk appetite. And that simply means, like, if I have a business and there's sometimes the cost of mitigating a risk outweighs the value, right? So depending on what the risk is, what your risk appetite means, what will I put up with? What can my organization accept as a risk? I'll accept that level of risk because the alternative is too costly and there's not a return on the investment. But that's very specific and needs to be judiciously utilized by an organization. Other facets, auditors going to look at, make sure that these test plans, are clearly, there's clear objectives and ownership, and the testing followed up and lessons learned and that kind of thing. We're also going to look to make sure that these, the business continuity management program itself was comprehensive. There was training, testing, and all facets were followed. So that looks at, that'll look at the overall effectiveness of business continuity management for the organization.
I think it's important to highlight where risk appetite really comes from. So as far as these inherent risks and whatever your residual risk is after you apply a control, the risk appetite should really be informed by all of the other things that you're doing throughout the life cycle of your programs. The risk assessments that you're doing, the audits that you're performing internally and externally, these should all use objective information to inform the overall risk appetite for the organization.
Okay, so this is just more of a graphic of the kind of stuff we talked about. We talked about overall risk management, meaning enterprise-wide risk management. And under that, one of the umbrellas under that is business continuity management. And then you'll see, you go across from left to right, the risk management, the strategies development, kind of the stuff that Andy and I have been talking about for the last 30, 40 minutes here. So this is just a graphic that kind of puts it in, some people like images, and this, I think, speaks well to it.
And yeah, as you can see, what we sort of stated earlier was that business continuity, the planning portion of it is just one smaller facet of the overall business continuity management process and life cycle.
So when you look at the risk management piece of it, it analyzes, the risk factors, right? When you're looking at, an organization's critical functions, and you're assessing it, you're looking at those risks associated with it. And here are some examples, like accounts for capital and reserves if you're in the banking world or financial sector, but others, in general, that are like management of events that could impact these critical functions or systems that are involved. And then you look at the idea that, look, business continuity management needs to be part of an overall enterprise risk management, like the last slide showed.
And we talked about business continuity management not being done in a vacuum. Having it integrate with enterprise risk management is not only important, but it's necessary. You can't have business continuity management without understanding and correlating the enterprise risk overall for the organization. The two should not be done separately. They should not be assessed separately. They should be incorporated with one another and work in tandem throughout the life cycle.
Okay, a little bit more on that. The BIAs, like I said, the foundation earlier I mentioned, it's the business impact analysis is where you identify which critical functions and the risk management processes that identify and monitor continuity risks for the entity. Kind of fancy words, but look, the foundation is the BIA, the business impact analysis, and understanding the risk levels for the organization. So when you talk about risk management, these are common facets: risk acceptance, risk mitigation, meaning a plan to mitigate that risk, and then risk transference, as well as avoiding risk altogether. Business impact analysis, I talked about it. I'm beating this horse dead for sure, but really it's just the functions that are critical, but for each business unit, prioritizing which ones are more important or more critical than others, and what the core cost to the organization may be. Some people like to put exact dollar amounts to the impact, and that's fine because everything does boil down to that at the end of the day. But I think it's more important, rather than get hung up on a rating or a number or exact dollar amount, would be relative to other functions, which one's more critical, and then let's move to prioritize them properly, and then identify clear recovery time objectives. When do I need this back online before the impact becomes more critical? Those are the really most important parts of the business impact analysis for an organization.
And business impact analysis is, once again, are not a thing that are done in a vacuum. There's cooperation throughout the organization to be able to pull the objective information needed to put towards the business continuity management program. So information that's taken from these business impact analysis is directly used to inform the business continuity planning process moving forward. Keep beating that dead horse.
Yeah, and the other thing too to remember about BIAs, it's not a one and done, like Andy said. Look, it's each business unit should be constantly considering and evaluating, right? As new systems or delivery channels for your business unfold during the business year, you're going to be, or should be, folding them in, basically assessing them, performing a mini BIA on that function, or whether the change was. Maybe it's just some resource changes, or maybe it's just a version update of software that now performs somewhat differently. Maybe it's a move to the cloud. It's some of these things. So it's constantly changing. Keep up on it. Go through, look at these bullets here as a refresher, but identifying, the critical functions and how they relate, the interdependencies, and what mitigation strategies and all these things. And you just look at them all together and kind of make sure that you're giving yourself sort of a gut check and updating those as needed for your business unit, your vertical.
And kind of putting a special focus on the interdependencies across the business units too. If there is a set of resources, assets, whether it's technology or personnel that are requirements for multiple business units to function, it is important to make sure that accurate information is obtained, so that if one of those functions does have a business interruption, it is going to either be able to pick up on the other end, or that it doesn't have a huge impact on any other business units that it does cooperate with.
And then we move to risk assessment. And remember, these all should sound somewhat familiar. We're just sort of drilling down. If you looked at that sort of life cycle slide I had a little while ago, the risk assessing follows, right? Now we've identified the critical functions through the BIA. We've even prioritized them. We know when we want them back online with our RTO. And then now we're going to assess them. We're going to look at what risks make up how these things tick, right? Are there third-party providers that are involved? What are their, I mentioned before, what's their claim to availability of their function they're providing for you or the service they're providing for you? Does it jive with what your RTO is? So looking at and assessing the risks for this function, and then putting together these strategies, right? So maybe one of my risks is, and many of us have this, right? We have internet capability and we're running, some functions across the internet. What if our wonderful cable, and I deal with this frustratingly, we deal with this all the time personally at the house as well as at the office. So we have a backup. We have, what else do I have as, in my office, if our primary means of internet capabilities down, well, we have an alternate. We also have a generator. These are mitigation strategies put in practice so that if the primary is down, we have an alternate. We have plans like that all over the place, and you should too.
And as far as identifying scenarios, it is good to have a slate of possible scenarios that could affect the organization, documented and tested. But it's also important to understand what the least common denominators are affected by those particular scenarios, and put extra focus on those. If there are multiple scenarios that do have the opportunity to affect multiple assets or resources, it's important not to focus on the scenario so much itself, especially during testing, but to focus on the affected resources by those scenarios.
Okay, the strategies. Well, that's the so if you look at what comes from some of these risk assessments that we performed and what mitigation strategies we can put in place. Well, this is you're looking at the development of effective strategies that meet these resilience and recovery objectives. So these are sort of plans to kind of move you through that. Some of these strategies, they should include addressing personnel, process, technology. So all those things, you always talk about people, process, technology. So these strategies need to consider those things, as well as some of the critical business risks to the specific operating environment, right? So, making sure that we provide high redundancy. I gave you the example of, well, here they talk about communications and things, but we, for us, the internet is, in most businesses, is really a lifeline, right? We run a lot of stuff through it. So what other strategies do you have to work around in the event that our internet's down? Or power? Well, I mentioned we have a generator. Many of our clients do. Some don't. What's the plan if that goes down? Maybe we work from home. Maybe that's not a concern for your business. But you got to make sure that you understand those things, and don't forget some of these old legacy systems that you have in place. Some of our clients are in different industries, like the gaming industry. I mean, think about a casino. They have unique challenges. You can't just pull tables and put them in another location. Likewise, some of our clients are in the manufacturing industry, very specific equipment. What can you do? Sometimes you just have to accept as your strategy that something's unavailable for a period of time. You may not be able to relocate some of the stuff to other facilities. So every business is unique, and you need to consider these specific strategies to address those. Resilience, another, sort of, handling. So when you look at physical resilience and cyber resilience, it's, you want, organizations need to consider like different things like insurance. For example, cyber insurance now is, I remember when it first came out years ago, people didn't know what the heck it was, but like any insurance, it's, the devil's in the details. Make sure when you do look to, and I recommend you do consider cyber insurance these days, and also business continuity insurance. Business continuity insurance has been around way before, right? During Katrina and 9/11 and all these, a lot of other businesses we do work with, they always had plans like this, or many of them did, where they go to hot sites. But with the insurance, you're paying, there's a per diem for using these hot sites, and the insurance covers that. In the case of cyber, which we're seeing a lot of, the same kind of thing. Some of these incident response activities that are very expensive, and legal counsel that are very critical during an incident, your cyber insurance will cover that. So make sure you look at the details of when it's invoked, because there is, much like regular insurance, there's kind of sort of that, the base, you got to pay a certain fee before it can be utilized, and you got to meet the requirements. Think about it. Insurance companies don't want to pay if they don't have to. So make sure you read the fine print. So looking at these resiliency plans and making sure that these align with your business and they're reasonable, integrating them with your other, with facets of the DR again, which is your IT strategies, and making sure that you have them dovetail into the other facets of the business continuity overall management. Okay. And winding down on the plan itself. So looking at business continuity, the plan, we've got event management, we've got continuity recovery, facilities infrastructure, payment system, liquidity, incident response, DR, all these things we mentioned earlier. A lot of them we drilled down on, but these are kind of examples of what facets would be in a typical plan. And no plan of any kind has any value, even if it's the best plan, if we don't train our staff on how to use it. All right. So the implementation, when you talk about implementing a plan or a policy for that matter, it may read well, may be awesome, but if it's sitting on a shelf or it's sitting on a shared drive somewhere and no one knows what the heck to do or where it is, it's valueless. So let's take that plan, let's implement it. By implement, I mean train people. Let's distribute it, make it available, make them own it. They have responsibilities. Let's train them on it and test on it later, which I'm stealing my own thunder from follow-up slides here, but just making it available and train folks on the facets of it.
Consider training one of those resiliency requirements that should be in the program. You get security awareness training to make your workforce more resilient to phishing scams and downloading files off of email that are potentially malicious. So training is one of those things that constitutes as a resiliency, so that your workforce is prepared and understands what to do when a continuity event transpires.
And as I mentioned, the exercises or tests that you build for these plans, they got to be reasonable, right? So we do a lot of this with different organizations, not just because of the pandemic, but we do a lot of these, been doing them for years. And we like to fold, often we'll test an incident first and then have it dovetail in and fold into as it should, if it's done properly. When you get to the point of isolating systems, now all of a sudden we're kicking off business continuity. So we're doing a test that does both. We're testing our incident response plan and our business continuity plan. The test needs to be reasonable, both of them, whether it's just incident response or in this case, business continuity. We want to test the plan and make sure it's real, it's reasonable, it's believable. We have assembled the right team. We walk through the exercises to make sure we test the facets of this plan in a thorough way, in a believable way, so it applies to our business specifically. We look to make sure the tests mature each time we do them and make them more, the depth and breadth of these tests should be more mature as you continue to test these over time. And as I mentioned before on one of the earlier slides, if you're a large organization and you're using your business continuity plan properly, it's more of a sort of a guide, a framework for the orchestration of the communications and when to trigger things. But when it comes to the details of recovery, these playbooks are being invoked by the business units themselves that have details. Well, they should be testing these things quite regularly, as I mentioned, throughout the year to make sure these procedures that they have and these strategies are all working for their particular business units, and then together overall through a holistic test annually that we've multiple business units might be impacted and they're using their playbooks accordingly.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, as far as expectations when you are performing a test or actually going through a real scenario, things are supposed to perform as expected, and if they don't, that in itself is a gap. And we're going to kind of talk about the importance of documentation moving forward, but being able to identify things that do not work out as planned or as tested previously is something that would require further scrutiny moving forward when the program is updated.
Good point. One of the other things to know about tests, in some ways, there's no bad tests other than what Andy just mentioned. The last part would be if I tested something and then through my lessons learned, I realized, boy, I need to fix this thing, right? And maybe I need to update my plan so that next time we do that, what the person or people may have said during the test, or vice versa, right? My plan's solid, but the people didn't follow it. Maybe I need to retrain. I need to do things. If we're still getting the same recurring issues during a test, that's bad. But in general, a plan test. So when you go through and do an exercise or a test of a plan, if there's lots of problems, that's okay. That's fine. There's no such thing as a bad plan as it relates to that. And the reason for that is that's why we test, to identify those gaps, to mitigate those risks. The only bad test results are those that haven't been fixed from the last time. That is not only infuriating, but unacceptable, right, for business. So make sure that as you test these plans, you mitigate them through your lessons learned, you identify them, then mitigate them, make sure that they're put to a project plan with a clear owner, a timeline, and get those things resolved. And then as we talked about, the discipline of business continuity management, making sure that those results are fed to the board or the oversight of the executive group, whatever's oversight is being provided. And that way they know there was a plan done. Yeah, there were some issues. They were mitigated. Here's the project plan for them. They were mitigated. So next test, we expect not to see them.
And going back to that documentation thing, documentation is something that I think is generally not underscored enough when it comes to real world events and tests. Bring it back once again, my medical profession from my previous life, both in the medical field and the technology field, documentation is extremely important through the process, because if you are not documenting what is happening, there's no way you're going to be able to inform the changes in the future. And we're talking documentation during the planning phase, but also during the testing phases and the execution phase of a real world event. When it comes to a business continuity event in an organization, it's very, very similar methodology as it is to a mass casualty event in the medical world. You still have to assess what happened. You have to triage. In this case, it would be finding the critical assets and resources in the organization and begin the immediate remediation, which for an organization is going to be recovering information, recovering resources. And medical side, it's more, do the initial wound cleanup and things. I don't want to go down too far that way, but it also brings into focus the continued follow-up after the fact. You don't just write down what you have and then move on to the next thing. You have to continue to follow up on it to make sure that things you noted previously have been resolved throughout the process. Otherwise, previous issues that you thought were resolved may crop back up again.
And as we sort of bring this to closure, incident response, a key facet, first of all, a requirement in most industries, as I mentioned before, and a lot of organizations fold it into or under the umbrella of, their business continuity management. A part of that would be the incident response. So, and as I mentioned, it makes good sense if you think about it. In the old days, it wasn't the case. It was separate completely. But more and more you see folks folding them in. I don't care if they're separate together, but I will say, as I did before, real world situations, if an incident does occur that is, some kind of attack on a system or systems to an organization, if you have a good plan there, your incident response plan is going to result in the isolation and then, sort of containment of the issue, and then moving to mitigate that. Well, while you contain or isolate, you've simply made that system or systems unavailable, in which case it spawns business continuity activity. So whether you keep it separate or put it together, I don't care. Examiners, auditors, if you're in, depending on what industries you're in, it shouldn't matter. Just like combining policies, whether I have, one big WISP, written information security program or policy, a set that includes acceptable use, password management, all these change management, all these policies, whether I have it in one big fat document, several policies, doesn't matter. What matters is that we have clear roles and responsibilities identified. We have a clear purpose and scope of each policy or plan, and we have ownership. So we know who is going to do what, when, and where. So those control statements are paramount. This is no different. Incident response plan, we need clear identification of what roles people have during a potential incident or real incident. What will happen next, the orchestration of moving through to identify, then move to isolate and contain, and then eradicate and move back to normal restoration and normal functioning. So that's why folks often fold them in. But if you keep them separate, there is really no major deal with that, as long as you have the key facets.
And whether they are separate documents or they are combined together, the importance of having an incident response plan or an incident response program overall to give resources the ability to respond to specific events in a timely and efficient manner can many times prevent an overall business disruption from occurring. A lot of times it starts with a simple incident that snowballs out of control. So having that incident response in place from the beginning can avoid a business continuity decision having to be made moving forward. An analogy I was using with Jerry before the call, something that I learned in the Army was the terminology that proactivity is the cure for complacency. And kind of like how physics refers to it, an object in motion tends to stay in motion. So if you're moving and you stay ahead of everything, even if there's an object moving at high speed towards you, you have more of a chance of plowing right through it. But if you stay stagnant, if you don't respond in a timely and efficient manner, and an object keeps moving forward towards you, chances are you're going to end up getting pushed back and spend the rest of the time being reactive rather than proactive.
And this is just references, it's a lot of the material that we present on these slides, which we'll make available. I mean, I know it's dry material to a degree. We love it, we live it, and we help a lot of organizations through it. So we'd love to work with folks if they need help. But look at these sites. These are great resources, regardless of industry. Don't get hung up on the acronyms, so much. Making sure that you have the proper contents, far more valuable. And the keys again are just making sure that you've gone through your business impact analysis to identify the critical functions. You prioritize them, you weight them properly, right, and move to risk assess these functions to identify mitigation strategies. And like I said earlier too, with Andy, we were saying, look, folks, make sure it aligns with your business's strategic objectives, right? So as each year, as they fold or unfold at the end of the year, typically, and plans get put in place, make sure that as you build out your business continuity management program, it aligns with your business. It dovetails into your business, not into a generic business or somebody else's business, but rather your business.